Later on. Well, welcome everyone. Again, so good to have you all here. I'm super excited for this session, this bonus session with Michael Richardson as our guest speaker today. This is our sixth session, say that 6 times fast, sixth session of the Climate Finance Summit, Greenfaith's No Faith in Fossil Fuels Climate Finance Summit. It's been a really amazing week. And I'm not just saying that, I really think we can say that and really celebrate the amazing conversations that we've had this week. Just to recap, and if this is your first time joining, hello, my name is Reverend Chelsea Macmillan. I'm the Climate Finance Campaign Organizer here at Green Faith. And we have a couple of other Green Faith staff here. We've got Allie and we've got Amy. They'll give a little wave and a little hello. And again, Michael Richardson will be our guest speaker today. But just as a recap of the last few days, we started on Monday with our opening session. We had powerful teachings from Rabbi Arthur Waskow. We had Michael Lerner join our call. We had Dr. Atul K. Shah join us. That was an incredible session. It really set the tone for this whole week. Tuesday night, we co-sponsored the World Council of Churches Save Children's Lives event, also hosted by the UN. That was a really amazing session. I hope some of you got to make it to that one. And that evening, on Tuesday evening, at least I'm in East Coast time, so translate to your own time zone as you will. But on Tuesday night, we engaged in spiritual practices for resilience. That was a really beautiful session. I know some of you came to that, and thank you for bringing your heart and soul to this work, because that's what Tuesday night was about. On Wednesday, we had climate finance on the ground. We heard some really powerful testimony from grassroots leaders who are living on the front lines of destructive fossil fuel infrastructure. And then we had amazing guest speakers. We learned with guest speakers from Dayenu and Hindus for Human Rights, Laudato Si movement, and Faiths for Action in the UK about things that we can do, that people of faith can do and are doing to keep on putting pressure on the finance industry that keeps funding the fossil fuel industry that is destroying people's lives and livelihoods. Yesterday, we had an action hour. We made over 50 calls to Bank of America. That was really exciting. Amy helped lead that one. And then we talked about and introduced our new climate finance circle, which we'll bring up again a bit later today, because we're going to keep digging into this work together as we continue to build this faith-based climate finance movement. And lastly, we are here today together for values-based investing for faith institution endowments. I can't wait to get started, but before we do, as we always do here at Green Faith, I'd like to help ground us in a spiritual moment so that we always remember that we are faith first and everything that we do is arising from that place. Today, I'd like to share a poem by Ellen Bass. It's in this book some of you might be familiar with, called All We Can Save. Please make sure you're on mute. Thank you. Sorry, so this book, All You Can Save, some of you might be familiar with. It's an amazing collection of essays and poems, and I'm going to read a poem from Ellen Bass. And I invite you, as you're listening to this poem, to close your eyes if that feels comfortable for you, or at least find something that's not the screen to rest your eyes on for a moment. And then just take a couple of deep breaths and really feel your seat in your chair or your feet on the ground. Just bringing some attention to that sense of touch, feeling the weight of your body being supported by the earth. This is The Big Picture by Ellen Bass. I try to look at the big picture. The sun, ardent tongue licking us like a mother besotted with her new cub, will wear itself out. Everything is transitory. Think of the meteor that annihilated the dinosaurs. And before that, the volcanoes of the Permian period. All those burnt ferns and reptiles, sharks and bony fish. That was extinction on a scale that makes our losses look like a bad day at the slots. And perhaps we're slated to ascend to some kind of intelligence that doesn't need bodies or clean water or even air. But I can't shake my longing for the last 600 Iberian lynx with their tufted ears. Brazilian guitarfish, the 4% of them still cruising the seafloor, eyes staring straight up. And all the newborn marsupials, red kangaroos, joeys the size of honeybees, steelhead trout, river dolphins, so many species of frogs breathing through their damp, permeable membranes. Today on the bus, a woman in a sweater the exact shade of cardinals and her cardinal-colored bra strap exposed on her pale shoulder makes me ache for those bright flashes in the snow. And polar bears, the cream and amber of their fur, the long hollow hairs through which sun slips, swallowed into their dark skin. When I get home, my son has a headache, and though he's almost grown, asks me to sing him a song. We lie together on the lumpy couch, and I warble out the old show tunes, night and day. They can't take that away from me. A cheap silver chain shimmers across his throat, rising and falling with his pulse. There never was anything else. Only these excruciatingly insignificant creatures we love. There never was anything else. Only these excruciatingly insignificant creatures we love. So take another deep breath into your belly and open your eyes if they're closed. And we have a moment or two. I would love to hear in the chat some insignificant, excruciatingly insignificant creatures you love. Let us know in the chat. Today, I'm thinking about magnolia trees and my mother. What are some creatures you love? Betsy loves elephants. Allie's pets, Rusty, Casey, and Ollie Oxfree. Who or what else do you love? Let us know. Neil's rescue greyhound, who he had for 7 years. Dragonflies, I love that, Linda. Lemurs, cat salamanders, verbena. Allie got very mesmerized by blue sea dragons yesterday. I love that. David's cats, Olive and Scout. I love that. Zebras. I can feel the love here already. All the birds, seahorses, June's rose garden. Another vote for elephants, owls, octopus. I love that. Oh, Donna's rescue dog Copper and the trees that are budding out. Lions. The list could go on and on. I'll move us along now. Jaguars, I love it. But hopefully this will just be a good reminder that this is why we're doing this. This is why we're getting into the nitty-gritty work of talking about where our money is and how to move it and how to put pressure on the big financial institutions that are pouring vast amounts of money into the fossil fuel industry. So this is what keeps us grounded. This is what keeps us going, is our love for the earth. And with that, I'll hand it over to Michael, who will start us off with some ESG myth busting. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Chelsea. And it's good to be here with you again. And the others from Green Faith. Amy, good to see you again. And I see a few friends here that have participated in the workshops we do on individual divestment, how individuals move their money from the fossil fuel industry over to doing good. People like June and Marty and Margie And I also see our ally and friend, Pat, from New York City Third Act. So it's good to be here with all of you. What we're going to do today is going to be slightly different than the approach that we've had through the week, and that this is going to be very much interactive. We're not going to be looking at too many slides, and we're going to be talking to each other. So you're going to be welcome to inject as we go through. We're going to have some segments with open discussion, and we're going to have some breakout rooms. Let's take a little peek, Chelsea, here at what the agenda looks like. I'm going to do a shared screen. I'm doing the share screen, but I'm not seeing what I want to be seeing, Chelsea. Okay, let's see what happens here.
Yeah, we're seeing your desktop. There you go.
Now we're seeing this now, right?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, thanks.
If you
I
press
figured
the
it
little
out.
green button, you can blow it up to your whole.
My little green button right there, right?
Yep.
All right. So as we sketched out here, we're going to go through 3 segments. The first one is, what is ESG? So start your thinking caps right now. We're going to ask you to enter your definition, or we could even say your opinion, into the chat. And then what's going to happen there is Chelsea is going to read back some of your definitions and comments and opinions, and we're going to use that to comment on. I'll comment, Ali will comment, Chelsea will as well. So that will take up a few minutes. And then we're going to go off into some breakout groups where you're going to discuss from your own experiences or what you know as far as the obstacles that we are facing as we're looking at trying to divest our endowments and other institutional investments. And then part 3, we'll go back into another open discussion on how we go about influencing the trustees and the other stakeholders that are controlling the process on divestment. Now, when we come out of the breakout groups, I'll remind you again later, someone from your breakout group will report back to the overall group, and we'll have more discussion. So from there, allow me to share another screen with you for some comment here before we get into it. This comes from our friends at the Ego Dharma Center. And I share this often in my workshops as a reminder to myself as well to all of us is, what are we actually trying to do in this movement? So just allow me to share this, where it says that our turning towards structural harm, perceiving not the banker, but the greed, centering not the activist, but the impacted, choosing not the practitioner's comfort, but the well-being of all, in community with others like and unlike ourselves, practicing right action. Now, it is this lens that I approach the climate finance movement. And just looking at that first part, turning towards structural harm. Certainly, we have unwittingly allowed ourselves to become financiers of the fossil fuel industry. We do it by where we deposit our money in banks. Are we using the Wall Street banks? By the credit cards that we use, are we funneling profits into the Wall Street banks? By the insurance companies that we use for our home and auto insurance, are we providing them with financing ability for the fossil fuel industry? And lastly, to this point, do we have our investments, our retirement investments for many of us, are we having those invested in those industries that are causing structural harm? So we want to see that we move our money away from doing harm to where it is doing no harm. But even better yet, let's see our money go to do good one step further. But in doing so, let's not focus on the banker, but the real root of this injustice, greed. We can form strategies around greed. It's hard to form strategies around bankers. Centering not on the activist, but the impacted. I come from a Buddhist tradition and the Mahayana tradition of taking the Bodhisattva vow, where the focus is on the impacted, not on the activist. And then choosing not the practitioner's comfort, but the well-being of all. That's repeating what I just said. But in community with others like and unlike ourselves, and practicing the right action. And that right action is to move away from causing harm to our planet and all the creatures that are on it. So let's approach our workshop today with this in mind. And with that, I want to go over to another shared screen to get us started on this first segment. Last month, Rivers and Mountains Green Faith went into a project with our friends at Green America and a group of financial advisors that are affiliated with Longwave Financial. And we are putting together a presentation on the divestment of endowments, the divestment of fossil fuels from endowments of faith-based organizations. We started with a very small beta group of 3 or 4 faith leaders that are involved with various endowments, the Reformed Church of America, the UU Church, and the Episcopal Diocese of Long Island. And then that branched out into last month where we did an invitational workshop. We jokingly called that our Beta 2.0. And we're now going to be moving forward with this overall workshop. And presenting it through various organizations, including Green America. And my guess is Chelsea will fabricate something so it goes through Green Faith as well. But I want to bring you just to this one slide. This is the relevant part for this workshop. ESG misconceptions. One of the first misconceptions that we come across is the lower performance.
Hey, Michael, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think I saw some people in the chat need a definition of ESG before, like, so they can follow along with this.
Let's. No, so I thought I had a slide on what actually gives the definition. So you're just going to have to listen to my verbal definition. So the E stands for environmental. The S stands for social. And the G stands for governance. So let's start backwards with the G. Governance is going to be looking at the transparency of the company's decision-making processes, and will also include the diversity that is entered into that process. Are women, people of color, frontline communities, are they being involved in the decision-making process? So G is for the governance. Are they transparent? Are they inclusive? Are they diverse? The S is for social responsibility. So this could get into a large spectrum of investment strategies, including prisons, weapons, tobacco, firearms, and the like. The E is environmental. Many of us know this also as SRI. That was back in the 80s and 90s, social responsible investing. Many of us now use the word impact investing, which really gets over, let me kind of show this slide here. I could jump around. On the impact investing, it's one thing for it just to be an index fund. That's how most of us invest right now. And it's another thing to exclude out those bad things. We don't want to have tobacco. We don't want to have firearms. We don't want to have fossil fuels. But we want to move over to impact, where we're actually bringing in things that are good so we can see our money doing good. So let's go back over to the ESG. It is basically a word to say that we are investing our monies in a way that is moving from doing harm, not just to doing no harm, but to actually doing good. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, because you read in the newspapers frequently that there is an organized, well-financed campaign to discredit ESG investing. One of those assaults is that the statement that ESG funds, SRI funds, whatever you want to call these, they don't perform as well. We want to talk about that. Also, that there's such high fees involved in them because they're not passively indexed. We'll talk about that a little bit. They are actively indexed, and because they're actively indexed, that means labor hours go into it, and that means I have to charge a higher fee. Also, that they're political driven, that there are those of us that are out there pushing companies to do societal good, and also there's companies out there that are pushing us back from being able to do that. And then you can't measure the benefits. Let's just read that. Over the past few years, industry data and regulation have improved greatly, helping to reduce the risk of portfolio greenwashing, the exaggeration of a company's environmental credentials. And what happens there is that quite often we have companies like Vanguard, BlackRock, and the others that are saying they're doing good things. The banks also, Citi, Chase, they say they're moving in a good direction, where all the while they're actually doing more harm than they used to be doing. They're quick to say, oh, look at all the good things we're doing. We're moving in these sectors. And at the same time, we look at the reports and they've actually invested more money this year in fossil fuel than they did the year before. So this is a section right here where we want to go into some open dialogue. Come off mute, or Ali, what's the best way for them to do? What do you know? What can you offer to this group as far as what are the misconceptions around ESG investing?
I can, this is Chelsea, but I can read a couple of things that were put in the chat that some people see. Well, Pat pointed out that ESG is an acknowledgement of the practical and moral responsibilities that financial institutions have to all of us, not just their investors. And in general, June was commenting that the ESG is a lot about greenwashing. I wonder if you could speak to that, Michael. Like, is ESG always greenwashing, or is there any benefit to that?
Well, on greenwashing itself, the definition is usually that you knowingly are saying that you're doing something that is good when in reality you're not. Even our government here in New York State has done that, where we have a landmark climate act. We have a rather incredible implementation plan called the scoping plan. And the elected officials, the governor and the legislative leaders, are very quick to say how they have passed this legislation and how they have embraced this scoping plan, but yet they haven't funded it. And they're actually working with the fossil fuel industry to water down the regulations around it. So we would call that greenwashing. You say you're out there doing good, and yet you're not. I noticed that someone here is from the Quaker group that's working with Vanguard. Nobody knows greenwashing better than that group. Is there someone who could speak on that?
Donating that big old TV in the closet in the second bedroom.
Is there someone to speak on the green phase? Excuse me, on the Vanguard greenwashing?
I'm a supporter of the Earthquaker Action Team, but I'm not directly involved with that campaign. But they have, in fact, not fulfilled some of their pledges. They like BlackRock were supposedly going to start using environmental and social criteria to reduce their exposure to environmentally damaging investments, but in fact they haven't done so. And I think you would have to talk to Eileen Flanagan more about that. But we're concerned that they're either not intending to do that, or they're just delaying it, which is a difficult thing to assess in some cases. I mean, the skeptical answer is that they have no intention of really pulling out of their investments or their insurance or whatever it is. But you know, they don't usually give adequate timelines on when they say they're going to do something, so you can have it sort of dangling out there, if you know what I mean.
Well, and exactly, this is the example of where a company, a major player, has said that they have these goals, these objectives. By 2030, they'll do this, by 2040, that, 2050, another thing. And yet their trajectory is nowhere close to that. In fact, it may even be going in the opposite direction. Pat, you had your hand up.
Yeah, Michael, I actually have a question. It's my understanding that ESG is in the news in the States, partly because the SEC is trying to work out regulations to apply these criteria to banks and other financial institutions. I'm wondering whether we have experience with something similar to these regulations or something similar to these criteria in other countries. If you know, do other countries have regimes imposed that would sort of equate to that, and what's the experience been?
Well, quickly, you can say the entire EU bloc does. And certainly the United Kingdom is moving in that direction. They're not fully implemented, but they do have regulations there through their checker. But the experience is transparency, that we know exactly what the company is doing to contribute to greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and what are their plans as far as sustainability. So a particular fund, I'm going to jump around here. Eventually, I'm going to show you a website called As You Sow. And on As You Sow, they have a column for a sustainability mandate. And only a fraction, not even 1% of all companies have a US SIF sustainability mandate. And fewer than 5% have a Morningstar mandate, meaning that the other 95% have no sustainability mandate at all.
Michael, this is all super interesting. It's clear that there's first of all, in the chat, people are sharing things about ESGs and what they know about corporate greenwashing. And I wonder, we are running a little over time, so I'm wondering if you want to. It's hard because it's like there's so much good conversation happening about this, but also maybe we could talk about some of the obstacles that arise when talking to faith institutions about this. Because there are a lot of myths out there that you just talked about, the misconceptions.
Let me come off the stop share so we are looking at each other a little bit more. So the obstacles that we have, I would be curious to know how many of you are at all involved in a movement with inside your tradition to divest an endowment fund or any other type of a pension fund or an investment fund. And what are the obstacles that are being faced? Now, in most cases, we find that the very first obstacle is the financial advisor that you're using, that they have bought into these old beliefs of poor performance, high fees, and that there would be some sort of a risk on the backside. They use the thing called fiduciary responsibility. People are aware of that word, fiduciary responsibility. That is usually applied with a period behind it. And that period needs to be erased. Because beyond fiduciary responsibility, we need to look at what harm is it doing to the environment and how that impacts our investments in the future. To be somewhat glib about it, what good does it do to have a very rich portfolio when the planet is going to go beyond 2.5 degrees Celsius and literally wipe out all world economies that we know of? So they're literally on a trajectory to wipe out the whole financial underpinnings of the market, and yet they use the word fiduciary responsibility. So that's where I would say we have to wipe out that period and talk about the future. And we need to talk much more about, does this fund start to turn around the industry, how we run our states and the nation? Without argument, we have an economy that's based on fossil fuels. And the amount of money and investment that is going to be necessary to transition to an economy that is based on renewables is incredible. It's an amount of money that the world has never tried to grasp. And as our timeline has shortened from 10 years to 7 years, and next year it'll be 6 years before we hit the 1.5 degrees Celsius tipping point, the cost of doing this becomes all the greater. So why are we investing in fossil fuel portfolios where we're being told that we have to divest from them? The world is saying we have to get away from the extraction of fossil fuels and the production and the burning of fossil fuels. We have the United Nations telling us we have to stop this immediately, not tomorrow. So why do we continue to invest when we're giving that type of advice? We need to be investing in renewables. That is fiduciary responsibility.
Michael, how would you like to proceed? Should we do breakout rooms and talk about the obstacles that people are facing or think they might face?
Yes, let's do that. Now, let me just touch quickly on a couple of the other obstacles than just the financial advisor giving you this limited advice. The next one are usually your trustees, because they're going to be the ones that are going to have to make the decision to do these divestments. Some of you may be working through the UU of America, the UUA, and the Assembly. Some of you may be have worked in the past through with the Presbyterian Church or with the United Church of Christ, or currently with the Reformed Church of America. And the decision makers are often still unaware of what the situation is and what the alternatives are and how viable those alternatives are. So those are the obstacles. But if we could break out into the breakout groups and talk about that, I'll drop into a few of them, maybe a few others will drop in, and we'll see how that conversation goes and then report back out.
Okay, we will break out in just one. Oh, you got it. Thanks.
Mm.
But Chelsea, I had the pleasure of dropping in and out of several break rooms, so actually all of them, and the conversation was very robust. We could easily make this a 3-hour conversation. But I think what we want to do is hear back from each one of the groups. What was the substance of your breakout group, and have conversation around that. So shall we start with group number 1? Who is there?
Group 1 was Derek, Fawn, Marty, Neil, Jordan, and Gwen. Anyone of y'all want to share? I nominate Neil. I know you I know you can summarize and synthesize.
There were two speakers on our panel, Dawn and Derek, that really stuck out. They were both incredibly well informed. Unlike myself, they have been involved with
I'm
wrestling.
Cherokee. Please get that right. Thank you.
I'm so sorry. Dawn, if you could please summarize what you were saying, that was really terrific.
No, you go. Go, Neil. My name is Fawn. We're Cherokee on my dad's side. That's okay.
I'm so sorry. Fawn. She summarized her challenges with trying to get the financial advisor and the trustees in her religious organization to connect the dots. And I'm not saying anything that other people haven't observed, a variation of, we agree with you in principle, but if it affects our endowment fund, it's going to take a lot to make us go from promises to actions. And she did a beautiful job of identifying the obstacles to that. Then Derek, who was also part of an organization, he was expounding some of these issues as well, which, again, if we don't identify what the obstacles are, we'll feel self-righteous and correct, but we won't be effective. So we need to do that. And then I offered that the muckraker of the early 1900s, Sinclair Lewis, had the observation, if a man's living is dependent on understanding, it's going to be damn difficult to get him to understand, and thus lies the rub.
Any other comments from that group? And how about group number 2?
Group 2 was Alyssa, David, Jenny, New View Communities, Donna, and Nancy.
Okay, that's me. I'm reporting. Thank you. So we had wide experience with buried nominations. Quaker Earth Care representative felt that they were ahead of the game. That it was mentioned that the United Church of Christ and the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America have made stances, and at least part of the pension portfolios are invested in fossil fuel free investments, that those need to be investigated further to make sure that if not all of them, at least they will become all the investments are fossil fuel free. That the Presbytery of Boston has just totally divested, which is great news. And Union Theological Seminary is aware of this, but is banking with JP Morgan. And so a representative person who spoke for Union said that that's being discussed. And also, since Union is part of Columbia University, the question of the divestment going along in Columbia University. So anybody else from the group could speak as well? Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Group 3 was Julaine, Regina, Scott, Nicholas, and partially Chelsea and Michael.
Okay, I'm not really, I was one of the first ones to speak up, so they said, why don't you talk to the group as a whole? And I am not involved in investments, so I'm possibly not the right person to do this. But my personal experience has been with my faith church, who had declared in 2014, they voted yes on a resolution to divest in 5 years from fossil fuels. They have failed miserably. And I am in the process of stirring the pot with some emails and some information and a very detailed proposal for the business world in our 2023 General Assembly, the UUA General Assembly, to get my church involved. And people are saying they did not know about this failure. So one of the obstacles is that people don't know. The people in the churches think it's been taken care of. It hasn't. Another person said an obstacle was as I won't call it petty because it does intrude, but relatives who are in the fossil fuel industry, relatives of the people in charge of making these investments. And perhaps there needs to be more oversight of the, whatever you call the group that makes the investments, I don't know, oversight of that group. Another comment was from, I believe, Nicholas, who said that as a customer of the banks, that is just so frustrating to deal, especially with the larger banks, because they cobble together so many groups of their investments, and it's hard to follow that and find out just how much of your money is being spent on what you don't want it to be spent on, invested in, that it's so complex, and that he's just spent years of moving from institution to institution just to try to maintain control of what his investments go to. And it's just, and another, Regina M. offered a very practical alternative. I don't know how practical, that perhaps we do need to talk about we do need to talk about why we're doing this, but we also need to talk about incentives for moving your investments, because there are people who, as far as they're concerned, the money is the end line. And again, I apologize for my lack of appropriate phrasing and appropriate words in the investment world, but she encouraged us twice to look at the possibility of learning what alternatives are out there that we could offer to people to move their investments to, that would not completely lose all their money, etc. And I'm kind of at the end of my scribbles. And if anybody else in the group would like to speak up, perhaps in a more knowledgeable way, please do so.
Okay, thank you. Group 4 is Adrian, Betsy, Dan, Ma'ama Lafir, and maybe other folks dropped off from your group, but go ahead.
I think that's gonna be me, whether I want it to be or not. I'm gratified to hear so many Presbyterians speaking up about the efforts that the Presbyterians have been doing in divestment and some of this stuff. It's felt like a really long haul since 2014 in trying to get the Presbyterian Church to move, which is one of the barriers, is just the inertia of the conservative financial elements of a denomination like ours in the Presbyterian Church. Unfortunately, one of the other barriers is that Presbyterians in particular employ a strategy where they deal with individual companies. And what we've ended up doing is divesting from 5 individual companies and simply moving that money to other fossil fuel companies. So we haven't reduced our carbon footprint at all within the denomination, but we are no longer invested in Exxon. So I suppose that's a good thing. I'm a little disappointed this morning this afternoon that I'm not seeing Abby on the call. Abby and I, for many years, worked with the Presbyterians to try to make that divestment happen. And it is gratifying to see that at least there's some progress. Betsy mentioned that the Episcopals are engaged in something called Season of Creation for about 6 weeks, I think every spring, if I got that right, Betsy. And there's a thought that it might be a possibility to incorporate investment language in that whole Season of Creation conversation as well, to think about this ESG sort of language. What we ended up with, what we focused on at the end was Matthew 6:21. I didn't have the chapter and verse, but somebody else in our group did, and that's basically the idea that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And it's a common verse that many of us in the mainline Christian denominations kind of use in this fight to think if we take the converse of that, where our heart is, that's where our money should be. And we should use that money to do the kinds of things that we think are important in the world. And that's what the definition of fiduciary responsibility should be, taking our heart and using our money to back it up. And that's enough.
Amen. Thank you, Dan. Great. Group 5 was Bonnie, Rex, Amy, Linda, Sherry, Stan, and Barb.
Group, I took notes, but I don't need to be the spokesperson. Should I go ahead or? Okay, I'll go ahead. Quickly, we had a range. Some people were just at the beginning. The obstacle is I don't even know where to start. So that, I don't even know what questions to ask. I'm just learning about it. So that's one thing, giving people a really easy entry bar and steps to take. Another obstacle that came up was realizing that your financial consultant doesn't know enough about this, or if they do, they're not telling you. The example that was used was Thrivent, which is a Lutheran-based fund. And there was a lot of frustration about the fact that Lutherans have made some work to divest, and yet there they are still having 5.24% of their money in fossil fuels. So Sherry's sharing what she showed us. Thank you, Sherry. And so then getting help to get out, that's a real struggle. Like, how do I then, have the right person, helping me get out of this money? Then another thing that was brought up, talking about the Bank of Canada, one of the struggles and obstacles is knowing which is the right tactic to take. Should we be engaged in the shareholder conversation to put pressure on and therefore remain invested, or should we completely divest? So that was another big question that came up. And finally, we talked about the fight that is about to erupt in the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly in June, where we talked about the fact that the UUA is not interested in divesting. And so we came up with a great action, which was all of the congregations should stand up and say, here is my, every year we have to give our fair share. Here's my fair share check. I am ripping it up, and I will not support you until you divest. So we came up with a powerful possible action. So is there anything that I missed, team, from our time together? All right, then check. That was group 5.
Thank you, Amy. Group 6 had June, Susan, and Kermit in it. Would one of y'all share? You're the remaining 3 from your crew. Some of folks have dropped off.
We also had Anna and Robert in our group as well.
Great. June, are you open to sharing?
Oh, I can start. I think that Susan had a lot to say too. Actually, we all did. Susan was talking about how hard it is to get transparent information and really find out what is in these funds. And even talking to the bankers, what are they really investing in? And it isn't as clear as they would like to make it seem. And I'm going to, obviously, I didn't take notes, so I'm just trying to recall that. And Kermit was speaking about working with his financial advisors, and that they they are kind of poo-pooing and dismissing this idea because their commitment is to balanced portfolios. And even looking at the fossilfreefunds.org websites doesn't really give the financial advisors enough information for them to really understand where to go with this. What else? I had some thoughts about the inertia of our community, our faith community, that, you know, they've been doing what they've been doing for so long, and it's convenient, and they don't really get, even though they have wonderfully good hearts, very spiritual and all that, they're not making the connection. It's this kind of a dissociation with what's happening with our investments. So we are all very familiar with this, and we understand it. It's like breathing, but they're not at that place. They're not educated to understand this. They're not, it doesn't compute. So how we can get that awareness is kind of an issue when they have their own issues to deal with. Then we had a very interesting conversation with Endowments, who actually left us when he was in the middle of a really, I think, important thing to think about, is that, you know, we can change our banks and we can change our investments, but I'm not sure, I couldn't quite hear what country he is from in Africa. I think I heard Malawi, but that they are dealing with financial issues, social issues of such a different proportion to our little problems. You know, they have millions of people who are dying in the last year from environmental problems, I guess you'd say, and they the government is not doing anything to help. So it's all private funds and private investors that are actually helping the people, and they're working very hard to close coal mines and stand up to the investors who are coming into their countries. It's hard. It's very hard work, and it reminded me of, you know, how we're trying to save the environment by changing our light bulbs. It's just not going to do it. I mean, we have big systemic problems around the world. And of course, here in our country too, our government is not investing in a way that we would want them to use our money. So it's kind of like the poem that you read in the beginning, you know, it's the small things we can do, but it's the big things that are going to bring us down. So I don't know. It was a conversation we could have continued for another couple hours. And anyone else want to pop in and say anything? Susan?
Thumbs up from Susan. Thank you so much, June. That was
I'll just add one thing. When June mentioned the light bulb thing, that reminded me, as a metaphor, that was pretty much right when we were running out of time and you called us back. And it opened up for me a topic that I think is maybe only barely been touched on, the whole challenge of the systemic handicaps that prevent, I mean, people and institutions want to get a good return on their investments. And the system does not provide them with the opportunity on a consistent basis to get a good return on investments with a holistic perspective, looking at the return in terms of impacts on our environment, on our society. And so how do we tackle this high level macro system issue of the system just doesn't provide what we need as a society for ESG compliant or compatible investments across the board? And that also then raised in my mind the question and the challenge of, and I think our speaker may have touched on it briefly, Michael, about there is opposition to ESG as an investment criteria. And how do we prevent the rules of the game being changed to handicap our intentions and efforts even more? Because if states are passing laws saying their pension funds or they won't do business with investment companies that use ESG criteria,
how are we going to be able to continue this work? And so how do we mount a significant or impactful counter effort to prevent that freedom of opportunity from being taken away from us? So anyways, sorry.
Thank you,
Uh,
Kermit.
Kermit, you
Ker-
also mentioned how difficult it is to get an assets manager for your personal investments that's knowledgeable about ESG funds. And that's something I was wondering if, Michael, you had any more information about how to find people, that can help people with their investments who are actually knowledgeable.
Well, Susan, that's a perfect setup to exactly where I was going to take us now. Mindful of
Michael,
our time.
really quick, there's just one more group that
Oh, there is.
we'll hear back from, and then let's hand it over to you, and I'd love for you to speak to.
And this last group, maybe you could keep your comments to about 90 seconds. Sorry for the gap
Sure.
there.
Yeah.
Thanks,
We had a fairly wide-ranging conversation. I think sort of the salient points that came out from the prompt that we had was that complexity seems to be one of the big problems. Transparency in our institutions seems to be one of the big problems. Amy, I didn't expect as a Lutheran to be called out in this meeting, even with a slide, for crying out loud. But yes, the Lutheran Church has made some efforts, and I think they're significant efforts, but it's hard to tell who's pursuing them, if anybody. Let's see, one of our other members of our breakout pointed out that in her congregation, there were people connected to the industry, and they were in fact big donors to her congregation. This is, oh gosh, I've forgotten her name, but she's joining us from Indonesia. And that, that sort of situation raises a real complication too. I'm probably over 90 seconds already.
Let's try to, I'm going to try to get through what I have to say in about 5 minutes time. And Susan, back to your point, that what we come across time and time again is that we don't have a clear pathway for how we get the change in motion. And as I said earlier, one of the first obstacles we have are the financial advisors themselves, and either their hesitance or their reluctance or whatever their excuse is. Let me take you quickly, very quickly, to rivers-mountains-greenfaith.org. Rivers-mountains-greenfaith.org. About a half dozen or more of you in this group have been through this workshop for individual divestment. And in that workshop, which I click here, we certainly go through about why we use the large Wall Street banks. Wall Street banks exist for the purposes of providing complex financial services for Wall Street companies. Why are we using them? And we talk about credit cards and we talk about insurance, but we get down here to this page on investments. And as we do with individuals, we take them through this workshop. We also do this workshop for institutions because it's basically the same thing, except for an individual banking and whatnot, we have now an institution doing it. When it gets to endowments, it's a bit more. And that's why we had this particular breakout at the end of the summit. But here we do go over to the As You Sow page that Amy showed as a breakout on that one, where you can actually go in and do research. But what we want to look at here, just in my few minutes of talking, is under Green America, find fossil-free investments. One of the myths that we have out there is that there aren't alternatives. Now, there are a lot of financial advisors. Financial advisors are the ones that help us make right decisions. But then there are the asset managers that we usually think of as Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street, the big ones. There are very good asset managers out there, and there are very good mutual funds out there that we can be dealing with without dealing with the ones that we work with now. So how do we get our institutions to take a look at even this web page? How do we get someone to go and look around for what are the alternative financial advisors that are out here? You can click on this website and scroll through and see. the ones that are there. These are all recommended by Green America. And then also just further on that, finding asset management firms. Some of you may recognize some of these names here as I click on them. Chelsea, you'll recognize Amalgamated, but here's Boston Trust. There are Horizon Investment Services, Trillium. And then when we come and look at, this is the real surprise, mutual funds. Hello. There we go. Broad-based mutual funds that exclude fossil fuel companies by policy. Now, these are not fly-by-night funds. They've been around for a long time. They're well-seasoned. They're tested. They've been critiqued by the environmental movement as well as the financial community. Green Century, Parnassus, Trillium again, Impacts. These are the alternatives to the Vanguard, the BlackRock, and the others. So where do we go from here? Did I come off? I want to look at all of you. In just a few minutes that we have left, you've identified what the issues are here that we have to confront. We understand that there is a lack of vocabulary. There's a lack of understanding between the myths and the truths. There's a lack of willingness. There's the financial advisor that just is not part of the program, let's say. And then there are the trustees and the other stakeholders that are making the decisions. And so what I see here, Ali and Chelsea and Amy, is a need for, and I don't mean to be glib, hand holding. That's what we're doing on individual divestment, and that's what we need to do with institutional divestment. That we can have all the workshops in the world and we're not going to get where we need to be. We need to do some good old-fashioned hand holding. I'm in discussions a little bit later this afternoon with a group called This Is What We Did. What a great name. This is what we did. Now, they have been focusing on just banks and credit cards. Our conversation this afternoon is to expand this over into insurance companies and investments, including endowment investments. What they do is they put together a group, they call them cadres. And so it may be a cadre that is your particular church or your particular synod or whatever group you might identify with. And they come together in 3 different sessions where they have someone like myself or Chelsea or Ali come in, and we give them the foundational work that they need to research their bank, their investment portfolio, whatever. And then they go about for the next 2.5 meetings doing that work and then reporting back to themselves what they found. Great. The other thing they do is what they call office hours. I love this one, where people like myself and others sign up for office hours, and then people can call in and actually on the spot get guidance. So they've come across something with a credit card, or they found something with an insurance company, or they're looking at a particular financial advisor. And what can they do? They get that type of hand holding. And I think that that's what we need to expand. We're having this conversation with Green America. We're having this conversation with Stop the Money Pipeline with this group. This is what we did. And I know, Chelsea, you've put together, and I'm going to turn this over to you right now for what I think is a really good solution. And that is a bigger green face circle that focuses on climate finance.
Yes, thank you, Michael. I think that is a good segue because there's I feel like so much energy has just been generated here, and we're just like in it. We want to move the money. We want to put pressure on the financial institutions, and we want our congregations to do that. And I'm just excited right now to see how fired up people are about this. And I know that as we do this together, as we hold hands together in this journey, the work will feel lighter and more fun than when we're doing it on our own. Maybe not always fun all the time, but you know, sometimes the work is not so sexy, but we're doing it together and it's going to be great. So with that, I want to invite you again to come to our climate finance circle. We'll have our first meeting in a couple of weeks. I'm going to put the interest form here which many of you have already signed up, have signed into, but I'm going to share it again because I know there are more people here who are just raring to go with the climate finance work. Let me put this in the chat. There we go. That do it? Okay. Let me know if you can open that up. It should be good to go.
That didn't work for.
That didn't work. This form. Hold on just a second.
I think the URL is missing something.
Yeah, I think I deleted part of it because I put it in there twice. Okay, try that again. So there are some meeting times in there. Whatever is the most popular will be our next meeting, our first meeting time actually. And we're going to keep on doing this work. I think what I'm hearing here, as I've listened to everybody's shares, is that first of all, we need to do more education with our faith institutions around why the climate crisis really needs our attention and what our money has to do with it, and why people of faith are called to work on climate justice. So that to me is, we can educate our people, we can educate our communities. So let's do that together. And then sort of the next step or another piece of this work is to do some research on how do our different denominations actually work, because some are more democratic, some are more hierarchical. So there are different people to talk to within these different structures. So together we can kind of start mapping this out a little bit more so that we know who to talk to. And then lastly, we can put together groups who are doing some of this hand-holding together and really supporting each other through the work and talking about what comes up and how to keep moving through these obstacles. Oops, I put in the wrong, okay, that is the other link I needed to put in here. I was moving too many links around and that's why I got them mixed up. So,
Found it. It's in the. Yep.
Thanks, Allie. I can't walk and talk and chew gum and share links at the same time, so I apologize.
But you're doing a marvelous job. And in response to what you've just said and the comments Kermit made, I'd like to make the observation that I've been thinking about for a while, in that we're just not used to not being a dominant voice in the culture. Christianity has been a dominant voice in the culture for a very long time. And that theory, that model of dominion is so embedded in our congregations. And for those of us who are evolving out of it and saying we want to live a different way, it's difficult. We don't have that vocabulary fully developed yet, as Michael said, not just about finance, but about our whole approach to faith. And then I realized that dragging my feet on moving the money from the bank, I have nostalgia. I remember opening that account. I remember the people in that branch office. Now that was decades ago. That's nostalgia. That's memory of a culture that no longer exists. But when I tripped over it as part of my reluctance, I realized that maybe a lot of people haven't been able yet to identify that emotive kind of thing that says, oh my gosh, I'm going to move my money. They may not remember, but there's a nostalgia there for something that's already extinct. Okay. But the process, the part of the education, I really strongly believe has got to be helping people move through this process of not just the money, but all of the values surrounding it. And so another verse I'm going to throw out there just real quick to add to our lectionary lexicon is, what does it profit us, human, to gain the world if we lose our soul?
Thank you, Sherry.
Sherry, if I could just add very, very quickly a plug here for why we walk behind the banner of Green Faith. Rivers and Mountains Green Faith is in coalition with Stop the Money Pipeline, Third Act, and Green Faith. Why Green Faith? And it's the moral imperative argument. We, forgive me for saying this, own that argument. When you know that you are doing something wrong and you continue to do it, that is by definition immoral. And it's for us to bring that to the forefront. When for a couple of years at these climate rallies, somebody would say, oh, we have somebody here from faith to say a few words. And it was usually towards the end. Today, we lead the parade. We bring an assembly of faith leaders out front. The moral imperative argument is out front, because you can argue about a lot of things, but you can't argue that it is immoral to destroy the planet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sherry, and thanks for that, Michael. We only have a few minutes left, so I do want to wrap us up, but there's so much richness here. Thank you all so much for sharing. So we've shared that sign-up sheet in the chat, as well as a survey. So if you could take 60 seconds to fill out our two-question survey on this session, we'd so appreciate that. Thank you, Allie, for putting that in the chat. And so I'll give you a couple seconds, at least open up those links. And then I'd like to close us up with a song, and as a way to celebrate the final session of the Climate Finance Summit. This has been so amazing. So good to have all of you here. So many guest speakers. I just feel like this has been such a rich session to end this week with. So thank you all for being a part of that. I know we're throwing a lot at you.
Macmillan, before you wrap up, I have a question. Is it acceptable to make it a policy through government?
Is it acceptable?
This obstacle to
I'm
make
sorry.
a policy. To make it a policy.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Policy.
Make it a policy. Is it acceptable to make a policy around climate change? I mean, this is also part of our work, is putting pressure on the government, but this, and Allie knows a lot more about that in our campaign to put pressure on Biden and the US government. But right now our focus in these conversations, our focus has been on the finance industry. I'm sorry, we don't have any more time for sharing, so I'm going to share some lyrics in the chat and hope that you'll sing along with me. This is a song by Carrie Meyer, and it's based on a quote from Arundhati Roy, that you might be familiar with. Arundhati Roy wrote, "Another world is not only possible, she's on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing." So I'm gonna sing through the song a couple of times and then just ask that you join in. Keep yourselves muted, just because that's the nature of Zoom. It's hard to sing with each other. But I hope you'll sing along, and then we will all say goodbye. Okay, so the first part goes like this. Another world is not just possible, she's on her way. Another world is not just possible, she's on her way. So try that with me. Another world is not just possible, she's on her way. Another world is not just possible, she's on her way. So we do that 2 times. The second part goes like this. I can see her coming, I can hear her singing. It's not just possible, she's on her way. I can see her coming, I can hear her singing. It's not just possible, she's on her way. So do that with me. I can see her coming, I can hear her singing. It's not just possible, she's on her way. We'll start from the beginning. Another world is not just possible, she's on her way. Another world is not just possible, she's on her way. I can see her coming. I can see her coming, I can hear her singing. It's not just possible, she's on her way. I can see her coming. I can see her coming. I can hear her singing. It's not just possible. She's on her way. It's not just possible. It's not just possible. She's on her way. Amazing. Please unmute yourselves. Say goodbye. Thank you all so much for coming. So good to have you, and we'll be in touch.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye,
See
all.
you soon, meeting.
That's
Bye-bye.
It's been wonderful.
Everyone.